Hello, and thanks for checking this video out. Today I'm going to talk about some of my favorite stories from the May-June issue of Analog Science Fiction and Fact magazine. As always, maybe my reviews will encourage you to check the magazine out for yourself. Before I get started, I want to talk about something from the news that caught my eye several weeks ago. Elon Musk, at an event for Tesla Motors, was talking about some of his plans for his cars. One of the things he mentioned was the idea of a sort of Tesla taxi network, whereby Tesla owners could, when they got to work, say, release their cars to this network, which would then become self-driving taxis that would drive around and earn their owners some extra cash. What caught my eye about this story specifically was that the same idea was floated in a story in the November-December 2018 issue of Analog, Left Turn by Jay Parks. In that story, a character bemoans the prevalence of ride-sharing in an age of robotic cars, automatic cars. He says, once you're driven to work or the mall or wherever, you release the robot, and your car turns into a taxi. So apparently, Elon Musk reads Analog magazine. Good for him. Okay, on to the stories. First up is The Methuselah Generation by Stanley Schmidt. This story follows a group of tourists who travel to Mexico to look at the monarch butterflies who spend their winters there. And one of them is an alien. The tourists, not the butterflies. This was interesting to me for two reasons. One, the fact that monarch butterflies do have a so-called Methuselah generation. Monarchs usually live 4 to 5 weeks, but every winter they travel to Mexico to hibernate, basically, and then return to North America in the spring. And the butterflies who do that are the Methuselah generation. They live for about 8 months, 4 times as long as the rest of their kind. Did you know that? I did not. The second thing that I thought was fun was that the story involved a travel agency on Earth that had made arrangements with extraterrestrial visitors. This was a callback to an earlier Schmidt story, Invaders, from the September-October 2017 issue, which involved aliens coming to Earth to witness the solar eclipse, and meeting a travel agent who proposed making arrangements with extraterrestrial visitors. Speaking of callback stories, Midway on the Waves by Phoebe Barton was another story that was set in the same universe as a previous story of hers, Where the Flock Wanders, from the May-June 2017 issue. That story involved a crew investigating the wreckage of a spaceship and finding a safe with a letter inside addressed to the captain of the wrecked ship. Midway on the Waves featured the person who wrote that letter. It was a good story, kind of bittersweet with that particular revelation. Actually, there were a few stories in this issue that were kind of bittersweet. There was Galena by Liam Hogan. 2 scientists find an Earth-like planet 25 light-years away. They check it for signs of life but don't find any. Then one of them makes a very drastic decision that may change that for the future. This character was an exobiologist, and he was struggling with the decision of what does one do with one's life when it seems like one's life mission has no meaning. Gates of Paradise by Edward M. Lerner was a follow-up to Paradise Regained from the January-February 2017 issue. It involved the far, far-flung descendants of humanity on Paradise, sending an astronaut up to explore Big Ship, which was what they called the generation ship that transported Earth life to Paradise eons ago. Big Ship's orbit is decaying, and if it's destroying, basically all first-hand knowledge of what those original Earthers would be lost. Not to mention, Big Ship is big enough that if it crashes, it could absolutely decimate the environment of Paradise, which already isn't in the greatest shape. It had kind of a saddish ending, but set up for another potential follow-up story that will probably be set several generations after this one. The Dominant Heart Begins to Race by Dave Creek was another fun one. This story involves an alien ship carrying the survivors of a planetary cataclysm looking for a new home. On the ship, one person is awakened whenever the ship approaches what it thinks may be a suitable new home, so that person can investigate. Now, the first part of the story dealt with what that kind of journey entails and was interesting enough. The second part was about the awakened astronaut exploring possible new homes in a very familiar-sounding solar system. What I thought was fun about that was that they were clearly in our neck of the woods a long, long time ago. The descriptions of the third planet sounded very much like Earth when it was still a fiery ball of magma. The astronaut awoke an associate to confirm his findings that the fourth planet in the system might work, and they agreed that it had the most potential for life, but obviously things didn't work out that way. Paradigm Shift by Eric Klein was a fun story. The reminiscences of a hitman who's a fan of sci-fi magazines, hired for a job right at the time that Sputnik was launched. It wasn't a particularly sci-fi story. It was, set in the real world, but it did feature a lot of fun references to authors and magazines of the Golden Age. Mulligan by Bud Sparhawk involved two lunar settlers on a quest to find Alan Shepard's golf ball. That was pretty fun. Welcome to Your Machines by David Ebenbach was a very funny one. Written as an introduction to a manual written for brand new Mars colonizers, it had some really great wry humor. Talking about artificial intelligence, for example, he says, "We've seen all the relevant movies, 2001, The Terminator, Completion, War Games, etc., and so we know how things can get out of hand once machines start thinking for themselves." Really very funny. My favorite from this issue was definitely Forgetfulness by J.T. Shera. Astronauts returning from a deep, deep interstellar mission find themselves effectively obsolete. For one thing, the space program was effectively cancelled while they were gone. For another, while they were gone, a new drug was invented which rendered people pretty much immortal. So these folks who expected to find people 60-some years older than they were when the astronauts left, even though it was really like 6 or 7 years from their perspective, find that not to be the case. But there is one glaring and deeply troublesome side effect to the drug. It has to be taken monthly, and taking the drug resets everything back to the state it was when they first had the procedure done. And I mean everything, including folks' minds. The narrator discovers this when his mom, whom he met when he first came back, expresses surprise one day that he was back from space, because she'd taken her supplement and all her memories of the last month had been wiped away. Philosophically, I thought this was a very fascinating tale. Of course, all the stories and articles were loads of fun, but I wanted to mention these ones specifically because I really, really enjoyed them. I hope you enjoyed this review and will consider checking out the magazine. If you do, please let me know in the comments. Thanks again for coming by, and I'll see you next time.